Hello, Shonda. Thank you so much for joining She Leads today. I am so excited to have you on the show and just to learn from you, so thank you for coming.
You're most welcome. Thank you for asking.
Of course. So, Shonda, you are the founder and managing partner at Chess Ag Full Harvest Partners, an asset management company that specializes in investing in the agricultural industry. And with this, you bring a wealth of experience. So I read that you have 25 years of experience in managing various forms of financial assets and just being in hedge fund environments, whether that's a executive director at Goldman Sachs or a partner at Montier Partners. And from what I saw, a lot of it is overseas, whether that's in Tokyo or London. So definitely excited to hear about that. But before we get started, I want to hear, one thing I love asking my guests as a first question is just to take me back to when you were my age, 22 years old. You were graduating from UT with a bachelor's in anthropology and zoology.
Yes.
And at this moment, what did you imagine you wanted to be? What did you see your career? What questions were you asking yourself? Just, walk me through that process.
So, wow. I am probably very different, maybe, than many of yourself or your compatriots.
Yeah.
I had no clue what I wanted to do.
Then you're very similar.
I probably, I came from a very rural, very, sort of middle class, average upbringing. And I loved anthropology. I loved animals. But I just didn't know. And I had two job offers, one doing bone identification for the Pentagon, oddly, at the forensics lab in Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
And the other one, I wasn't even cool enough for the counselors to want to talk to me. And so a friend of a friend said, you should interview at Cargill. And I knew Cargill because I had been a farmer's daughter, and I literally farmed a lot of my high school and college summers. And so I thought, okay, I'll try that. And thank goodness the guy who was normally in charge of recruiting the college graduates wasn't there that day, and a more senior person was there. And they said, we think you'd make a really good grain trader. You can figure the basis, and you're 20 years old. You can do this or that. I'm like, yeah, I can do that. Oh, yeah, I can measure a grain car. I had all these sort of skills,
right?
Weird skills, right? Very practical skills. And so I thought, gosh, Hawaii sounds really nice, but blood, what do I do? If there's blood or there's war, I'm going to faint. I can do bones, but I can't do blood. And so I took the Cargill job and sort of never looked back. And I think sort of maybe a why or something to share with people your age is, and I feel maybe it's lacking a little bit today, is about curiosity. And I think that my curiosity and my interest in people and the world and life and how things work has really played a huge part into getting me where I am today. And I continue to be curious and fascinated and excited about new things, skeptical and sort of passionate and driven. And I attribute a lot of that to the luxury of growing up on a farm where I could get dirty. I could play in the mud. I could drive a car at 5. I could do all these nutty things. And maybe there weren't a lot of friends, and maybe I'm not the best person at being social or doing lots of things that are really important today in today's world. But I'm very, very curious, and I'm a good judge of relative value, and I can figure things out. And I think that those are very important and intangible skills that maybe aren't taught at school so much anymore.
Yeah, I love that. I think I've heard this from previous guests, but I think it's so important to be curious, and especially at this stage in my 20s, it's almost all about discovering what I'm drawn to, and I've heard it's okay to not know, which is which is good for me. So
good.
yeah,
I would think Stanford. Wow. Ooh.
oh, trust me, you definitely have that perception, but I think in reality, a lot of people are trying to figure out what they want to do. So it's
Right.
so okay. So you went to Cargill, and you were a trader. So at this point, so first of all, you said you were from a family, you grew up on a farm. Did you always have this passion for farming and for agriculture, or was this something that was forced upon you and then you later developed this passion again? Like, how was that relationship?
Yeah, I did a classic rural farm kid move.
Yeah.
I don't have COVID. I have bad allergies.
Okay, good.
I did a classic rural farm kid move, and you hate it. You can't do sports.
Yeah.
You can't go out on Friday nights. You're at work at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning. I mean, it's a really different lifestyle for a young person, especially today's young person.
Right.
And, there aren't any play groups or piano there's all sorts of things kind of not there. I guess I did have piano lessons for a little while once we moved to town. But so you hate it. Yeah. I could not wait to get off the farm. I read every historic novel, romance novels. I must have been 10 years old. I was reading Gone with the Wind. Oh. And just imagining life someplace else. And then, of course, you leave and you get out there and you see things, and then you think, well, golly, I'm unusual. I have this weird skill set. And I think I've been blessed and spoiled, horribly blessed and spoiled, or beautifully blessed and spoiled, that I sort of entered with ag. And then I just sort of, if somebody said, do you want to try this? I'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll try this. I'm gung-ho. And Cargill had a thing, I don't know if they do it anymore. People probably don't allow it, where it'd be Wednesday afternoon and you get called into your boss's office and they'd say, oh, you're in Kansas City, you want to move to Minneapolis? Oh, you got to go next week. They need you there next Thursday. And you just go. And if you said no, you were done. Yeah. And so I was just flexible and willing to try things. And I had such a wonderful journey so far.
Yeah. And I feel like, so talk me through, after Cargill, going to Goldman Sachs and Montier, I feel like you also, did you have this desire to not only be in finance and dive deeper into finance, but also traveling the world and not staying in America? Did you have that desire prior, or where did that desire come from?
Yeah, I had that since I was a little kid. I would read. I read everything I could get my hands on, everything. And so when I was 17 years old, I saved all my money, and one summer I went to the Philippines.
Wow. Yeah.
To study fish farming. And so I always had, weirdly, for a kid, particularly weirdly now, because that's not what rural America is so much about, sadly. I always had that desire, and I loved it, and I loved living in Japan, and I loved living in the UK. And finance is funny. I like relative value. I was always a kid, if my neighbors were having a garage sale, I'd want to be there and sell things and take the money and count the money. And but I was never so drawn necessarily to financial engineering per se. I think what interests me, or has always interested me most, is what's happening, what's human behavior doing, what will it cause? Yeah. How will the election in Germany move volatility? I was always much better at trading volatility, which is the relationship of two things, actually, than I was outright betting on things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. So tell me a little bit about your inspiration with founding Chess Ag Full Harvest Partners, and where you saw, at what stage did you see, okay, there's a loophole, or there needs to be more, there needs to be more devotion to the agricultural industry, and there's loopholes within farming that I could tap into?
It's funny. I hadn't thought about him for a long time. I wonder where he is. I was in London, and I felt like the hedge funds industry that I'd been involved with, and this was probably 2001, 2002, even back then, and I was leaving, I sold my stake in Montier. I felt that it would be disintermediated. And that's sort of kind of what eventually happened. And, I'd been so lucky. I'd been more successful than I'd ever dreamt of. And I didn't necessarily, I never do kind of what's easy, which is probably stupid. I should do more of what's easy. But I tend to choose what's interesting. And actually, I would still suggest that today. I speak to groups of young people and they say, I want to make a lot of money. I'm going to do this. And I'm like, that's the stupidest reason I've ever heard of in my life for you to go do something or choose a career, because there's a high probability that it won't work out for you, which has nothing to do with your brains. It could be timing or the markets or all sorts of things. And so don't do that. Choose something you really love or that fascinates you. And so I'd always sort of kept my hand in farming, and friends used to tell me when I was at Goldman Sachs, and they were going to lose somebody who'd gone to a dude ranch, let's say, and they were like, oh, I'm out of here. I'm out of New York City. I'm going to go be a dude, get myself a ranch. And I'd say, well, it's really hard. It's not what you saw in your experience. Excuse me.
No, you're good.
Go home. Go to my farm and farm, be a hand on the farm for a week. And if you come back and still want to leave, leave. And everybody would come back and go, ooh, we love Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'd always sort of, people would be like, you idiot, you fill your gas tanks by going and getting in a car and driving without seeing another soul for 200 miles. You love rural. Why don't you put your two skill sets together? And that's what I did. And it wasn't an easy road. It's been a really hard road, actually. But it's not one that at this point in my life I would change for anything. It's so fascinating. And I think food is so fascinating. And people maybe have taken it for granted for so long. And with our current pandemic issues, maybe not so much anymore. And how we'll think about it and the way we'll think about it and where we'll source it. And all those things are like sort of flying up on the table.
So true.
Really interesting time to be in agriculture.
Yeah, so true. So you touched on it a tiny bit about that there were challenges. So tell me a little bit, what is the most challenging part when you were starting this and maybe when you face today? And almost how do you deal with it? What lessons have you learned that almost have taught you lessons to deal with challenges in general?
Just one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
I think that the girl thing has been really, really tough. It is women who take risk of power. I think women who are in sales, women have made incredible advances, and yet still such a small percentage are CEOs. Right. So women who manage a lot of money, etc., I think it's still really, really hard in the world, and it's difficult because, and particularly in agriculture in rural America. Oh my goodness! But it's when you're dealing with someone, they're either that way or they're not. I used to have everybody would say, "Oh, wasn't Japan horrible, Shonda? Oh my God, to be a woman in Japan." And I had this boss at Cargill, Joe Koizumi. And he was wonderful. And he didn't care if I was a woman, a spotted cow. He didn't care who I was. As long as I did my job, I did it well, I was funny, and he's still one of my great friends today. And so, but those people, I think for men, maybe there's a lot more of those people in the world that you kind of see eye to eye with if you're a guy in the business world than if you're a woman in the business world. The amount of men or women, for that matter, that sort of don't care who you are and they just want to do good business is smaller. And so that's probably the biggest challenge that I've faced. And also, I think it's really hard in the United States today to be a global citizen. Maybe not in big cities, but certainly if you're in rural America, it is very hard to be a global citizen. It's people just don't think like that, and there's a huge divide between rural and urban.
Yeah.
And we want to make intelligent investments and money for our clients, but we also want to be a bridge maybe to help people cross those things, because rural America represents 20% of our population.
Wow.
It's pretty big.
So
Yeah.
That's crazy. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into the first challenge, being a female. Not only, I talk about it a lot, and I talk to my guests about being a female funder, female founder. It's just, there is a big gap still, but
Yeah.
you bring a whole dimension of being a female in finance and agriculture. So
Yeah.
you say how you can come across a boss who doesn't care who you are, what you are, it doesn't matter. But what about the other ones who do care and who treat you differently? How do you deal with those? And like, how do you maintain your confidence and your belief that you deserve to be there? And yeah, like, what do you do to still have a seat at the table?
Well, it's sort of maybe why I founded my own firm, is that I found it perhaps too risky to have to answer to those people. And so, you do the best you can. And I rarely say things, or nor am I particularly confrontational. Everyone thinks I'm this strong, tough woman. I'm not necessarily a pushover. I'm kind of a pushover though in some ways. Don't tell anybody. But it's what to say about that. I'm lucky that as a founder, a person running my own business, I can avoid those people.
Okay, yeah.
And so I know almost instantly now, not always, but often, if it's somebody I just don't want to do business with, or I don't want to be involved with, or I don't want to, that's going to gaslight me or do something crazy or whatever. And I just am sort of like, okay, next. Well, I'm going to find a different person to work with on irrigation. And so luckily we can still vote with our wallets and our pocketbooks and move on down the road.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really cool people out there as well, and wonderful men I love working with that are great friends. And so and we do good mutual business.
Yes.
So you just sort of figure out, you take so much and then you figure out ways to move on if it feels like it's a mountain you can't get over.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it all goes towards also just like finding your right team and finding the right people who will lift you up and everything. So
absolutely, really important for us.
Yeah. So another challenge that I want to, so for instance, people my age, especially if I haven't grown up on a farm and I really don't know agriculture, do you find it a challenge to get these young people, new people into agriculture and really experience it? Or is that something that doesn't really come up? Because I don't know, I feel like a lot of people, they don't even consider to go into that industry when they haven't been exposed to it.
I think that's probably true. It takes less and less people, for the most part, to run a farm, and because of mechanization and economies of scale. And so, but there's so many different layers and levels that you can get involved in ag.
Right.
And I think that lots of people don't understand it. A lot of people think that they understand it because they woofed or they they worked on their urban farm. And so, I guess maybe I'm a grouch or an old cynic. And I'm like, okay, come out and work for a season. And if you still like it, then we're going to have, a really serious talk and pull you in.
Right.
But most people don't. It's hard work.
Yeah.
I'm lamenting, although COVID has me sort of stranded, my wings are clipped. But I can't go anywhere in July and August because one of our biggest crops is blueberries, and it's blueberry picking season. And it's so busy that even with fantastic team and help, I need to be on the ground sort of overseeing things. And so, it's kind of a hard life. And yet I'm so happy to be where I'm at. I can the beauty, the Willamette Valley nature, if I'm in Kansas, if I'm in Mississippi. I love geographies, and I love being outdoors, and I love being in rural settings. And so, it's all about trade-offs in this world. So it might fit somebody who's a bit more that way inclined.
Yeah, definitely. And so tell me a little bit about the impact that COVID has had on your work, specifically, like you mentioned the blueberries, and just working with your clients, and also just because agriculture is very weather dependent. So sometimes I feel like things can often go far from what you expected, but you can't really control it. And it's almost like I can almost say it's a good life lesson with coronavirus. Like you can control what you can control, but oftentimes you have to leave it up to nature. So tell me a little bit about that and how it's been impacted.
So imagine what the lesson that coronavirus has taught you, right? Yeah. Think about that. And then just like Mach 10 or double that. Yeah. And so we're used to the shit hitting the fan or things not doing right, etc. Yeah. And there's ways to mitigate risk in agriculture, and you diversify, sort of what you plant and where you do it at and things. But Corona makes it worse. I think that what's really happened in the United States, and I don't know whether anyone really wants to have the conversation. Actually, strangely, I have a foundation. It's called the Porch Society. Right. It stands for Preservation of Rural Cultural Heritage. If you look on the Porch website, 2 years ago, some colleagues and I and a friend convened a workshop, and we're usually doers. We're not so much conveners. Mm-hmm. But this time we convened to talk about the nexus of food and public-private partnerships. And I really think that it's fascinating right now. I'm terrified. The USDA just did a farmer to families food box program, and I don't think very few farmers were actually awarded contracts. Yeah. and the meat industry is where it's most prolific, but it's certainly there in other industries where consolidation has happened, and now there's 4 manufacturers in the United States that may account for, upwards of 80% of all the meat in the country, and that's not okay. It's gotten a bit crazy. And so I think that having tandem systems, everybody expects inexpensive food. Yeah, I get that. And but also for national security, we need to have good strong localized systems, regional systems. I wish that Stanford, maybe you could encourage them to teach some classes with practical applications like butchery, right? Somebody was doing some arts workshop, and I said, you should have butchery as an art, culinary skills, knife skills, butchering, and really encourage people to be founders, right? To start businesses that might be perhaps considered slightly old-fashioned, right? But they're not old-fashioned because we need to eat every day. And I personally don't think that the future is going to be meatless meat. It's just, I can taste the difference. Yeah. And that's no offense to vegetarians, but even with vegetables, I was just with a colleague a few minutes ago, and we're coming up to this blueberry harvest. Basically starts at the end of June, and we're terrified. Prices rallied like crazy when the COVID first happened, and then they fell off a cliff because all the food service and the restaurant business and all the schools and everything shut. And now maybe it's come back a little bit, but we're terrified. And they're really, for specialty crop producers, there's very little safety net in the United States. And so it's scary times. And yet then we think about innovating, right? So a couple of friends and I went out and we bought a processing line, and we're going to process our own berries. And sell them straight into grocery stores, and we have a label and we have a brand, Pharmacopoeia Farms, or we might use another friend's brand, and think outside of the box. And so I think it's a really interesting time. I'd love to encourage very bright, very go-go young people to maybe think about ag, because and right now there's this whole ag tech industry, and I think I talk on it at Stanford maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even more than that now. But you know, it's great, and innovation's important, but so is hard work.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't look at one without the other. And I think somehow we've eschewed the notion of all the hard work that goes into something like cutting a steak or, you know, working in a factory or whatever. And those folks have been a little bit left behind. And somehow, like, we need to elevate them and mix them in with the innovation and bring them along with the innovation. And that's super, super exciting.
Yeah.
And I think might equalize some situations that need to be equalized.
Yeah.
And maybe provide security and a better, more secure food supply as we go. Maybe that's too rosy and win-win, but I sort of think somehow there's something in all of it, and it's a really interesting lesson right now for us.
Yeah, no, it's very, very interesting, and I agree. I think there's a lot of innovation everywhere at our fingertips, so I think it's about capitalizing on that and really taking. It's like, I don't know, I read somewhere you can never waste a good crisis, so it's almost like taking this in, and So okay, so you mentioned how this was my next question, and you gave a great segue. So you mentioned how you don't think that the Impossible Burger and meatless, you don't like the taste, but you don't think it's also the future. So I want to know, what is the future of, in general, in that category, but also in farming, in agriculture, especially with this integration of technology?
So I think that's a really interesting and complicated question. Yeah. I think that here's my challenge for all the brilliant Stanford grads. You can't. I feel I've been called, actually, because I spoke at Stanford a few years ago, and I guess it was more than 3 or 4 years ago, because like a couple of the guys at this talk even ended up working for me for a while.
Yeah.
And you can't prescriptively, with your technological brain, come in and predetermine a problem and think you've solved it. It's just bullshit.
Yeah.
And so I see these two lanes going along, and they're not talking to each other. They're really, like, there's no communication. Nothing's going to happen. It's not going to work. It's just horrible.
Wow.
And I think, a few of the young firms will be okay or get bought or something if that's the game that someone's playing. But to truly provide solutions, it ain't happening. And I don't think it's going to happen until, it's not going to happen overnight. It's such a base thing. It's been going on for hundreds of years, farming, right? Thousands of years, actually. Yeah. And I can so easily wear two hats. One hat is, I'm a shitty old farmer way out on my country road. Abraham Lincoln signed the deed to the farm that I was born on. And it still raises corn and soybeans. It's been raising corn and soybeans since the 1950s. Right. And you are trying to tell me that that's not sustainable? Yeah. Bullshit. Yeah. Okay, so that's one side. Then there's the other side. I travel all around the place, and we own all these farms, and we have tenants on some of them, and some of them we farm ourselves. And there's some really naughty people that need to go back to school and learn something, and maybe need to take time to do something in a different way. And so I want to spank them, and they're farmers, and they're sloppy and lazy. And I sort of blame Monsanto and Syngenta and all the big ag companies, because they've gotten it down to a little minute science, and they know every little thing, and they'll finance your chemicals, and they'll bring you your seed, and They just give a prescription and they make it easier to farm than it's ever been. Mm-hmm. And it's really not that easy. And so, or it shouldn't be that easy, perhaps. But maybe it's sort of caused some bad actors. There's some, and so I think just because somebody's organic or somebody's not organic or GMO, or I think that like throwing down these hard lines isn't helpful to anybody. And actually like bridging it or getting a job as a farm manager on a farm for 2 or 3 years and then solving your technological problem, right? Flipping burgers. I learned so much when I go out and work with my work crews. When there's 100 people in my field that are hired at $14 an hour to come in and prune my bushes. When I go out and work with them, that's when I learn. Yeah. And I think I know something and I don't. And so I really encourage people that if they want to solve problems in ag, they have to be in ag. And if you haven't been in ag, then get in ag and come spend some time here. And then use this knowledge from the outside to help us solve real problems that we really have. You know, it's so funny. People are like talking about internet and, you know, sort of this and that. And 30 or 40% of rural farms in America, we don't have enough signal to run the damn programs that people are making for us. Yeah. Right. And, so interesting. And they get out and people get out and feel like, what? And so sometimes going backwards is more innovative than technology. One of my favorite farmers in the United States, it's a farm called Tuberk's Farm. It's based in rural Mississippi. It's a classic, large kind of American farm, several thousand acres. They farm soybeans and rice, very Mississippi. They threw out so much technology, probably 20 years ago, and really went back to the basics. And now, and they do monocropping, and it's so smart. Wow. They have levees. They put water on once. They use less water than it takes to grow soybeans. They use less fertilizer. The organic matter is up in their soil. Nature abounds on that farm. It's incredible. They plant all these ancient varieties. They have a mill on their farm. They're vertically integrated. They mill their own rice. Wow. That farm is the most holistic, sustainable one of them that I've ever known. And yet it wouldn't fit anyone's perfect little definition. And so I think that it's forward and backward together somehow. It's holding hands, and it's looking at things that provide huge income for a lot of companies that we don't actually need perhaps anymore, that might be bad for us. Yeah. And maybe doing things in a more simple way might be better. And more sustainable in the long run, but it doesn't make anybody else a lot of money by providing service. And so I think it's those kind of conversations that, you know, I'm getting old, you'll be able to have with people. Hell yes, I believe in capitalism, but maybe it's kind of gone a little muck here. And sometimes it's okay to just get by and help all your fellow citizens and help them get by. And if you all slide by together, when things get a little bit better, you got to market again. And somehow we've sort of gotten away from that. And I know that seems to have deviated from your question, but I think not so much in a way, because I think that I feel like, you know, the Berkeley, I won't point fingers at Stanford completely, but like nutty, crunchy. My sister-in-law is a professor at Berkeley. She'd go around about it, but you know, it's very condescending. It's very like, I know I'm educated, you idiots out there, you're stupid. And that ain't helpful. Yeah. And they don't know. And so it's all that bridge building stuff.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I'm really glad I asked you about that, because it's almost, I think you can even draw parallels with anyone who wants to start their own company. It's as if you're solving problems for people in a different country. You don't know what they're dealing with. You don't know. You haven't been immersed in that environment. So who are you to say that you can solve it? or that you are solving it, even if you intend to and you want to. So I think it's really interesting. So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, so I just wanted to finish off with some fun questions. So first, what is a passion or hobby that you have, Shonda, that's just unrelated to your work at all?
Gosh. This is weird. I almost think all my passions and hobbies are related to work.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I would have been an herbalist, or maybe I still will be. Maybe I'll retire when I'm 70 and study herbalism. But that's, about kind of growing things and food and what's actually in it and what it's good for.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a huge foodie and I love, great food and wine. And so that's also about agriculture.
No, that's great. I love it. I think that's great.
I like to fish. That there.
Oh, very great. Okay, good. It's okay. I'll let that count.
Yeah. Okay.
So
perfect.
Okay, as the last one, I ask everyone, what is a fun or weird talent that you have that no one else really knows about?
My weird talent, golly, I'm not sure. I can make pig noises and sound just like a pig, but I really don't know you well enough to do that.
Are you sure you don't want to try that out?
No, I don't.
Okay, that's fine.
That's probably my strange talent. I don't know. Like I'm kind of getting old, and my weird talents are all getting smoothed out. I don't know.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll take the fishing and everything else that you mentioned is great.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. I can't. I'll tell you. My weird talent is that I can sound just like a pig. I mean, really like a pig.
Okay. That's a good one. I'll take your word for that too. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Shonda, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on to She Leads. It's been so much fun, and I've loved learning about agriculture and tech and just all of this. So thank you so much.
All right. I think that you should come and work in the blueberries for a week or two this summer, and then you could catch all you wanted.
You're right. That'll be great practice for me. I agree.
So, take care.
All right. You too. Thank you so much.